History tells us that ancient Rome was built by great men, celebrated male artists, and public figures whose names survived for centuries, but this story is incomplete, because while Rome praised skill and rewarded talent, it did not preserve everyone equally. Some names were remembered without their works, some achievements were acknowledged and then quietly erased. One of those names is Iaia of Cyzicus, a woman who succeeded in a world that was not designed for her success. Iaia lived in a society where women were expected to remain private, invisible, and dependent, yet she became one of the most recognized painters of her time. She competed directly with male artists, earned higher prices for her work, and built a professional identity based solely on skill. This alone should have secured her place in art history, yet today her paintings are gone, her story reduced to a few lines in ancient texts. This is not an accident. It is a pattern. The story of Iaia is not only about art. It is about visibility, power, and memory. It forces us to ask an uncomfortable question: how many artists were celebrated in their lifetime but erased afterward because they did not fit the narrative history wanted to keep? Iaia's life reveals how talent can be acknowledged while still being silenced, how excellence can be praised while its legacy is allowed to disappear, and through her story, we are not just uncovering a forgotten artist. We are confronting how history chooses who deserves to be remembered. Fact 1. She was one of the most famous painters in ancient Rome. In a society where artistic recognition was dominated almost entirely by men, Iaia of Cyzicus managed to achieve something extraordinarily rare: public fame during her own lifetime. Iaia was not a marginal figure working in obscurity. She was widely known and openly discussed among Roman elites, artists, and patrons. This alone sets her apart, because most women who practiced art in antiquity remained anonymous, confined to private spaces, or excluded from professional recognition altogether. Ancient Roman society valued art primarily as a public and economic activity. Commissions were tied to status, reputation, and visibility. For a painter to become well known, they had to attract elite patrons and compete directly in the public market. Iaia did exactly that. She worked in Rome itself, the center of cultural power, and built a reputation strong enough to stand alongside male contemporaries. Her name circulated not as a curiosity, but as a benchmark of quality. What makes her fame even more remarkable is that it was documented by ancient historians rather than inferred by modern scholars. Pliny the Elder, writing in Natural History, listed Iaia among the notable painters of his time. This was not symbolic inclusion. Pliny recorded artists he believed deserved remembrance, and space in his work was limited. His decision to name Iaia indicates that her reputation was impossible to ignore. Iaia's fame also challenges modern assumptions about ancient women's invisibility. She was not remembered because she was a woman, but because she was exceptional. In fact, the very reason she stands out today is because she disrupted expectations. She succeeded within a system designed to exclude her, and for a brief moment, that system had to acknowledge her presence. Her recognition in ancient Rome demonstrates that talent could break barriers, but only temporarily. Fame did not guarantee preservation. Although Iaia was celebrated in her lifetime, her artworks did not survive the centuries. Her name remained, but her visual legacy vanished. This contrast reveals how recognition and remembrance are not the same. History may admit talent, but it does not always protect it. Iaia's fame proves a critical point. Women were not absent from ancient artistic achievement. They were present, successful, and admired, yet their visibility depended on fragile acknowledgement rather than institutional preservation. Her story reminds us that being famous in the ancient world did not ensure a lasting place in history, especially if you challenge the boundaries of gender and power. Fact 1, then, is not just about popularity. It is about contradiction. Iaia was one of the most famous painters in ancient Rome, and almost everything she created was allowed to disappear. That tension defines her legacy and forces us to question how history decides who truly remains. Fact 2, she earned more than male painters. In ancient Rome, art was not only a cultural pursuit, it was a competitive economic profession. Prices reflected reputation, skill, and demand. For Iaia of Cyzicus to earn more than male painters meant something extraordinary. She was not merely accepted, she was preferred. Ancient sources indicate that Iaia's work sold at higher prices than those of many male contemporaries. This detail is crucial because the Roman art market was driven by elite patrons who valued status as much as craftsmanship. They were not inclined to support artists out of sympathy or novelty that if they paid more for Iaia's paintings, it was because her work delivered prestige, quality, and recognition. Economic success in Rome was public proof of excellence. Higher prices signaled trust and desirability. They meant that patrons believed an artist's work would enhance their social standing. For a woman to reach this level in a male-dominated profession directly challenged social assumptions about gender and ability. Iaia did not succeed on the margins, she succeeded at the center of the market. This financial advantage also implies independence. Most Roman women were economically dependent on male guardians. Iaia's income placed her outside this norm. Her art allowed her to sustain herself professionally, granting a degree of autonomy rare for women in antiquity. This autonomy itself was disruptive. It showed that artistic mastery could translate into personal freedom, even within restrictive social structures. Her higher earnings also explain why her name survived in historical texts. Economic success attracts attention. It generates rivalry, discussion, and record. Iaia was impossible to ignore because she altered expectations. Not only could a woman paint well, she could outperform men in both reputation and income. Yet this fact also reveals a deeper tension. Her success was acknowledged, but not protected, while male artists benefited from apprenticeships, workshops, and institutional continuity. Iaia's legacy remained fragile. Once her generation passed, there was no system invested in preserving her output. Her financial triumph did not translate into historical security. Fact 2 exposes a contradiction at the heart of Roman culture. A woman could be rewarded economically for excellence, but still denied long-term recognition. Iaia's higher earnings prove her mastery. They also highlight how achievement alone was not enough to guarantee survival in history. She earned more than male painters, yet history still took more from her than it did from them. Fact 3. She specialized in portrait painting. Portrait painting was one of the most demanding artistic genres in ancient Rome. It required more than technical skill. It demanded psychological precision, the ability to capture identity, status, and character in a single image. For Iaia of Cyzicus to be recognized primarily as a portrait specialist places her among the most accomplished artists of her time. Roman portraits were not decorative objects, they were instruments of memory and power. They preserved lineage, asserted social rank, and projected authority. To succeed as a portraitist, an artist had to satisfy elite expectations of realism and dignity. Patrons wanted to be seen as they believed themselves to be, and as they wanted others to remember them. Iaia's reputation in portraiture suggests that she mastered this balance with exceptional skill. Ancient sources emphasize her ability to capture likeness. This was not a minor compliment. Realistic resemblance was the highest standard in Roman portrait. An inaccurate portrait was not merely poor art, it was an insult. Iaia's success indicates that her portraits were trusted, desired, and respected by patrons who risked their public image on her work. Her focus on portraiture also reveals artistic independence. Many painters worked across multiple genres out of necessity. Portrait specialization implies choice. It suggests that Iaia was sought after enough to define her own artistic identity rather than adapting to whatever commissions were available. This level of specialization was rare, and even rarer for a woman. There is also a deeper cultural dimension. Portraiture involves sustained observation. It requires looking closely at another human being. In a society where women were expected to remain unseen, Iaia became the one who looked. She observed faces, expressions, and individuality, and translated them into lasting images. This reversal of roles carries quiet power. The loss of her portraits is especially significant, because portraits are meant to preserve memory. The disappearance of her work represents a double erasure, the loss of both the artist and the identity she captured. Her specialization makes that absence even more striking. Fact 3 shows that Iaia was not simply a competent painter. She was a master of one of the most prestigious and psychologically complex forms of art in ancient Rome, and through portraiture, she shaped how people were seen, even as history later refused to fully see her. Fact 4. She painted women more often than men. Unlike most Roman painters, Iaia of Cyzicus was especially known for painting female subjects. In a culture where women were rarely treated as worthy public subjects, Iaia's focus subtly challenged artistic norms. Her portraits likely captured expressions, details, and identities that male painters either ignored or filtered through convention. This alone made her work distinctive and socially unsettling. Fact 5. She mastered encaustic and panel painting. Iaia worked with encaustic painting, a demanding wax-based technique requiring precision, control, and speed. This was not beginner-level craftsmanship. Encaustic portraits were prized for their realism and durability. Mastering this method placed Iaia among the technical elite of Roman artists and proved her skill was not symbolic but professional. Fact 6. She chose art over marriage. Ancient sources note that Iaia remained unmarried and dedicated her life entirely to painting. In Roman society, marriage defined a woman's identity. By rejecting that path, Iaia chose autonomy over conformity. Her art was not a hobby, it was her life center. This decision itself was radical. Fact 7. She challenged gender roles without protest. Iaia did not argue publicly against Roman gender norms, she simply outperformed them. By succeeding economically and artistically in a male domain, she undermined assumptions without speeches or rebellion. Her existence was the challenge. Fact 8. Her fame survived, but her art did not. One of the most haunting aspects of Iaia of Cyzicus is this contradiction. Her name survived, her paintings did not. In the ancient world, where countless artists were forgotten entirely, Iaia's reputation was strong enough to be recorded by writers such as Pliny the Elder. Her talent was acknowledged, her success was documented, her existence was not erased from text. Yet the physical evidence of her brilliance vanished. This absence is not accidental. It reflects how fragile artistic legacy was, especially for women. Ancient art survived through copying, patronage, archival preservation, and institutional continuity. Male artists often had workshops, students, and apprentices who carried their techniques forward. They were integrated into artistic lineages that preserved style and memory. Iaia, however, appears to have stood largely alone. Without a workshop tradition tied to her name, without a school defending her influence, her work had no structural protection once time began to erode it. Roman portrait panels, especially encaustic works on wood, were already vulnerable to decay. Wood rots, wax melts, paint cracks. Survival required favorable climate or deliberate preservation. Many male artists' works disappeared as well, but their names were reinforced by later historians and Renaissance rediscoveries. Iaia's case is different. Her art did not simply decay, it was never institutionally prioritized for remembrance. There is also a deeper cultural layer. History tends to preserve narratives that fit dominant structures. Male genius fit comfortably into the story of Western art, female excellence did not. Her documented success did not translate into sustained celebration across centuries. When Renaissance scholars revived classical art theory, they focused primarily on male names. Iaia remained a footnote rather than a foundation. This creates a powerful paradox. Iaia was famous enough to be remembered in writing, but not powerful enough to control her own legacy. Her story demonstrates that recognition in life does not guarantee permanence in history. Memory requires systems, and systems often favor continuity over disruption. The loss of her artwork also carries symbolic weight. She specialized in portraiture, an art form meant to preserve identity and defy time. Yet her own artistic identity was not preserved. The painter of faces became faceless, the recorder of likeness left behind no visible likeness of her own. This fact transforms Iaia from merely a successful Roman painter into something more complex. She becomes evidence of how cultural memory operates, how it selects, how it filters, how it forgets. The disappearance of her art is not only a material loss, it is a structural one. It exposes the invisible mechanisms that decide whose creativity is allowed to endure. Fact 8 is therefore not just about missing paintings. It is about historical silence. It forces us to confront the uncomfortable truth that talent alone is not enough to survive centuries. Legacy depends on power, structure, and repetition, and when those systems do not defend you, even brilliance can fade. Iaia's fame survived in words, but art lives in images. And the silence where her images should be may be the loudest part of her story. Fact 9. Pliny the Elder recorded her success. One of the strongest proofs of Iaia of Cyzicus's importance is that her name was preserved by Pliny the Elder in his monumental work Natural History. This was not a casual mention. Pliny documented artists he considered noteworthy within the broader history of Roman and Greek art. To be included meant that your reputation had reached a level impossible to ignore. Pliny was not writing poetry. He was compiling knowledge. His work functioned as an encyclopedic record of science, art, and culture in the Roman world. The space he gave to artists reflected their perceived significance. If Iaia appears in his account, it indicates that she had earned public and professional recognition strong enough to enter Rome's intellectual archive. What makes this even more remarkable is that Pliny rarely centered women in his discussions of professional achievement. The fact that he highlighted Iaia specifically suggests that her success disrupted expectations. She was not mentioned as a curiosity, she was mentioned as a competitor, as someone whose prices and skill rivaled male painters. This detail is critical, because once an artist enters written history, they step beyond rumor and into record. Iaia's name crossed that threshold. Her presence in natural history confirms that she was not a myth, not an exaggeration, but a documented professional force in Rome. Fact 10. She proved artistic excellence was not gendered. The very existence of Iaia of Cyzicus stands as a quiet but powerful refutation of one of the deepest assumptions of the ancient world, that true artistic genius belonged to men. In Roman society, artistic mastery was closely associated with male education, public presence, and authority. Women were expected to be muses, subjects, or patrons, rarely creators. Iaia broke this structure not through theory or protest, but through undeniable achievement. Her success exposed a contradiction Roman culture preferred not to examine: that if artistic excellence were truly gendered, then her reputation, higher earnings, and technical mastery should not have been possible, yet they were. Her career demonstrated that skill was not biologically restricted but socially controlled. This distinction matters. Iaia did not overturn the system, but she revealed its artificial boundaries. What made her case especially disruptive was that she competed on equal terms. She was judged by the same standards as male painters, and surpassed many of them. Her work was not praised as good for a woman. It was valued outright. This forced an uncomfortable realization: if talent could exist outside prescribed roles, then those roles were not natural, they were enforced. However, history resolved this discomfort not by changing the rule, but by minimizing the exception. Iaia's excellence was acknowledged briefly, then allowed to fade. Her case was treated as anomaly rather than evidence. This is a familiar pattern. When a system encounters proof that challenges its foundations, it often isolates that proof instead of rewriting the structure. Fact 10 therefore goes beyond Iaia herself. It reveals how cultures protect beliefs by controlling memory. She proved that artistic greatness was not determined by gender, but history responded by ensuring that her proof left no lasting visual trace. Iaia's legacy forces a final, unsettling question: if one woman could achieve this level of mastery under such restrictions, how many others were never allowed to be seen? Her life does not just expand the history of art, it exposes the limits of the history we inherited. She proved that excellence has no gender. History proved that remembrance does. If you want more forgotten stories from ancient history and philosophy, subscribe, like the video, and tell me in the comments who we uncover next.